It's not very often in this hobby that we actually get a product that performs well above its price point, but today's one of those exceptions where I've got the Geshelli Labs A3 Pro or ARCL 3 Pro, and it's a headphone amplifier that absolutely performs way above the cost of it. This $500 amplifier is going up against and beating $1,000 amplifiers fairly comfortably in my opinion, and so I'm really excited to share it with you today.
I look up to the sky to remind me. I look left, I look right, behind me. In one moment you were there, in the next glance you're gone. I keep my head up and my voice tall, just how you'd wanted me to. With my arms outstretched for you to find me, around in circles I get so dizzy till I can't see. I will not hide any longer. I am spinning around.
The A3 Pro is the latest production from Geshelli Labs, who've previously released things like the Airish or the E2 as it evolved into later models. So they go from the original being the Airish, then they take just the first initial and the number after it. So we've got the Airish, then the E2. We've now got the ARCL, which went to the ARCL 2.5 XL, which is the one over here. And then we've moved on now to the A3 Pro I've got here in front of me. As I just mentioned, the A3 Pro comes in at $500, which is a fair jump up from the couple $100 you'd be spending on an ARCL 2.5 or even the E2, which is their balanced amplifier. But at the price point, it is absolutely phenomenal. A big part of that is that the A3 Pro marks the beginning of some collaboration activities between Geshelli Labs and Sparkos Labs. I've previously reviewed the Sparkos Labs op amps and also their Aries amplifier, and everything that Andrew from Sparkos Labs produces seems to be fantastically engineered. And so what's going on inside the A3 Pro here is a pair of Sparkos Labs op amps, specifically their Pro grade op amps, and the end result is an absolutely fantastic combination of price, performance, and I think styling too, but that's going to be very subjective. Getting into some of the specifications and features and functions of the A3 Pro, what we've got here is an amplifier that's going to output 2 watts into 16 ohms, which is not hugely powerful, but it's plenty powerful enough for any regular headphones. You might start to find it struggling with things like Susvara's, a BIS 1266, which yes, I have got up there behind me, the review's coming very soon. So it might struggle with a few of those, but for everything else on the planet, it's going to be completely fine. So if you've got Arias, HE1000s, if you've got ZMF 300 ohm headphones or Calderas, if you've got Sennheisers, this is going to drive any and all of those, no problems at all. And if I haven't mentioned the brand that you're currently thinking about, it will drive those as well. As I said, it's really only going to struggle potentially with things like the RAL CA1A, the Susvara, and the Abyss 1266. I can't think of anything else where it might not have the juice. And even then, it might have the juice for the others, depending on your listening setup, your preferences, your use of EQ, etc. And so we've got a fairly compact amplifier that's also relatively powerful, plenty powerful enough for most normal headphones. But on top of that, the A3 Pro has a few extra tricks. Just like the ARCL 2.5 that I've got here next to it, just for a size comparison for you, what you're getting with the slightly larger and obviously more expensive A3 Pro is an amplifier with all the same features as the ARCL 2.5, but more. So let's do a quick tour to explain what I mean. On the back of the device here, we've got RCA inputs and RCA outputs. So this can also act as a preamp if you'd like it to, and it's going to be a great preamp, just as it's a great headphone amplifier, as I'll describe soon. And then one of the other things that I really like about the A3 Pro, and indeed the ARCL 2.5 XL is the same, is that as a single-ended amplifier, it also accepts XLR inputs. So if you do have a DAC with balanced outputs, maybe you've found that the balanced outputs sound better from that particular DAC, depending on its design, you're not sacrificing quality by going with an A3 Pro, because you can take the high-quality XLR outputs from your DAC, feed them into this, and then still drive your headphones, even though it's single-ended output. In case you're relatively new to the hobby, you don't need balanced in and balanced out. They're completely different systems. So the balanced output for a headphone does not rely on the balanced input from the DAC. And that means that you can very comfortably drive the balanced input here, know that you're getting the best possible sound from your DAC if it happens to sound better that way, and then drive your headphones beautifully with the A3 Pro. Now, I also believe there might be an E3 Pro coming from Geshelli Labs, in other words, the Airish Pro, the balanced version of this one. And so if you do choose to wait for that, that's absolutely up to you. But I don't know when that's coming, or even if it is exactly coming. I don't know if the pricing is going to be the same. And what I can tell you straight away is that it's absolutely not needed. The output from the A3 Pro is likely going to be just as good as what you get from the E3 Pro. Based on my comparisons between the Arcall 2.5 and the current E2, which is the balanced version in the same form factor, based on that, it's going to be absolutely comparable and just a question of whether you've got a 6.3mm plug or an XLR plug on your headphone cable. Carrying on looking at the back though now, what we've also got other than the XLR inputs, RCA inputs and preamp RCA outputs is we've then got over here a DC socket. What that means is you're going to get a wall wart style supply with the A3 Pro, but it also means if you're someone that likes to play with linear power supplies, you can absolutely do that with the A3 Pro, and I'll talk about that as part of this review. And so far, everything I'm telling you is exactly the same as the Arcall 2.5, and that's until we turn around to the front panel. On the front panel, as you'll clearly see looking at these, things start to get different. Firstly, instead of the little tiny black kind of toggle buttons, now we've got these beautiful silver toggle switches, which also illuminate to tell you when they're on or they're off. And we've got 4 of them now instead of 2 of them on the Arcall 2.5. So what we've got going on here is we've got power on and off. This will also cycle through the internal coloured LED lights, which I have to say don't show up quite as well on this model. I think because there's more going on the front panel, you don't see the light quite as clearly. So if you are a big fan of the lights in the Gesheli Labs amps, you might find it slightly less obvious in the A3 Pro, but the sound quality in my opinion more than makes up for it. As we move on from the power button and the lighting toggle button, we've then got a tone button. What this is going to allow you to do is activate and deactivate or insert and remove the tone controls from the circuit. And I love this feature. I'm not a huge fan of tone controls, but I do like the fact that the A3 Pro gives you them. They're just simple bass and treble. They're using potentiometers, so it's an analog control as far as I can understand it. But what I really like is the fact that you can choose to put them in or out of the circuit. And that's because any componentry like this, such as a potentiometer in particular, these can degrade the sound quality by having them in the circuit. So if you want the absolute best possible, cleanest signal path from the A3 Pro, you're not losing out by the fact that it's got a bass and treble control. You just switch it on or off as you need to, and you've got controls when you need it, and you've got a perfect clean signal path when you don't. So that's really cool. As we then move on, you've got an input switch that's going to switch between the RCA and the XLR inputs on the back. And then finally, we've got a gain switch. So this has just 2 gain modes. You've got low gain, which is what they call unity gain, where the amplifier is just providing the power to drive the headphones. It's not increasing the volume of the signal from the DAC as such. And then on the high gain mode, it's going to a 6 times gain mode, where it's actually going to make the signal louder. So this is not about power. This is about how much amplification of the signal the amplifier is providing. And it does get a bit confusing. So again, if you're new to the hobby, I won't try to explain it in depth here. But what I'll tell you now is that regardless of which gain setting you have this on, it's producing the same amount of power. It can drive the same headphones regardless of gain level. What the gain level is basically doing is just changing how much you need to turn the volume knob to get the volume you need for your headphones. And so what that means is that if you've got very difficult headphones, you're probably going to want it on high gain, so you're not having to turn it all the way up to get to listening levels. But if you've got, say, a set of IEMS or sensitive headphones, then you're probably going to have it in low gain and keep the volume control more in that kind of 7 o'clock to 12 o'clock range. Not that there's specifically a best place to use the volume range, it's more that I know a lot of people seem to feel comfortable in that 10, 11, 12 o'clock sort of range on the volume. The final things to talk about on the front panel are, as I've already mentioned, we've got a 6.3mm headphone output, so this is a single-ended only amplifier, but as I said before, makes no difference. The Geshelli Lab amps have always compared really well between the balanced and the single-ended versions. They're essentially the same with different connectors. I don't mean necessarily the same on the inside, but the same performance on the outside as you're listening. And then the only other things to talk about is the quality of these lovely volume knobs. So you've got the 2 small ones for the tone controls and a larger one for the volume, and they feel great. They're made of aluminium, they've got these lovely knurled edges so they're easy to grip, they just feel really premium. And speaking of premium, you'll see here that I've got this lovely wooden case for the A3 Pro. When you go to the Geshelli Labs website, and there's a link in the description down below, when you go through to buy the A3 Pro, there's a whole lot of choices of different timbers you can buy. And so the price tag of $500 odd US, that's for the base options for timber. You can spend more for more unique, more special, more rare timbers, but you don't have to if you don't want to. So the choice is there, it's entirely up to you, but regardless of what you do, you're going to get a beautiful looking amplifier, somewhat like this one. The exact colouring can vary. I can't remember if you can change the faceplates. I think you can, and so that means the perspex piece can be a different colour. So you can get on there and customise it to get exactly the sort of amplifier look you want. But I think that's probably enough talking about the aesthetics and the features and the functions. Let's start talking about how it sounds. Because I've already told you it sounds amazing, but what does it actually mean? If you're trying to work out what piece of gear you should buy next, then the Passion for Sounds Recommends database might be helpful for you. In the description box of every single video, just down here, you'll find the Passion for Sounds Recommends section. If you click on this link, it'll take you through to the Passion for Sounds Recommends Airtable database. What you'll see in here is every single product that I've ever reviewed and recommend, in some cases products that I own but maybe haven't reviewed but recommend. And then once you're in here, you can use the filter button up here to decide to filter by things like whether or not the product type is for a headphone, for example. So maybe you're looking for a headphone. Filter it by that and you can now see every headphone I recommend. You can sort it by price, which is the default sorting, or any other sorting method that you want. And then once you've got the list of products you're looking for, you've got the links to the reviews of the products, and then also purchasing links for global retailers and also regional retailers for the US, Australia, Canada, and the UK. So feel free to play around with this, sort it, filter it however you want to. It won't affect what anybody else sees, and you can hopefully find just the right products for you. I hope this is helpful, and now let's get back to the review. The first thing I'd say is that the sound of the A3 Pro is very much what I'd describe as a neutral sound, but a refined sound. And so it's got very clean, crisp and extended treble, but it's in no way harsh. It's very smooth, not smoothed off or rolled off, but smooth and refined in its delivery. Likewise, the mid-range is clean and articulate, and the bass response is very natural, very clean. There's no sense of enhancement or emphasis anywhere in the frequency response from the Arcl 3 Pro. And in fact, overall, I'd say that its tonality is very easy to listen to. It's very natural. It's got a fluidity to it. It's, as I said before, nothing's enhanced, nothing's pulled back. It's just very natural, very neutral. The sense of resolution that it provides is nothing short of exceptional at the price point. And that's really, for me, what pulls this ahead of something like the standard Arcl. There is absolutely nothing wrong with a regular Arcl 2.5 XL. It's a wonderful amp. I often recommend it here. But this just goes to the next level in terms of that resolution, that detail retrieval, and that sense of refinement. The soundstage is also excellent, so you've got a good sense of soundstage size, excellent separation of individual sounds, individual instruments, etc. And as I listen to this just in isolation, making my original notes or my initial notes, I think probably the depth in the soundstage may not be top tier, but at the same time, it was good enough that I really wasn't sure, and so that's where, as always, I wanted to jump into some comparisons. Because listening to this without any comparison or any context as to how it's performing, I was honestly expecting it to get really close to $3,000 headphone amps. It sounds that good. And a big part of that, I'm sure, is those Pro op amps from Sparko's Labs. These are the same ones used in their $3,000 Aries headphone amplifier. And there's a lot you can hear in listening to the A3 Pro that reminds me of the Aries. It's not exactly as good as the Aries because the Aries has a lot more going on. It's got custom power supplies, all sorts of stuff happening. But the A3 Pro has a lot of that sense of heritage or lineage in picking up what the Aries is delivering thanks to using the same op amps. And so at this point, I was really keen to see how the A3 Pro stacked up against another excellent amplifier like the Burson Soloist 3 XP. So for this test, I put the A3 Pro and the Soloist 3 XP up against one another, and I had both of them running with the RCA inputs coming from an Yggdrasil OG from Shit Audio, and the reason for that was because I could run the same exact RCA signal out of the Iggy because it's got two RCA outputs and feed both amplifiers. I'll touch on the XLR performance in just a moment because both amplifiers can also receive XLR inputs. But starting off with both using the RCA input, I was listening to Don't Speak by No Doubt as one of my test tracks. And despite this being not the best recording, I thought the A3 Pro was doing a pretty good job with it. There was a slight sense of mutedness through the mid-range, but that's more from the recording than the amplifier. And despite it being a fairly average recording, the A3 Pro was doing an excellent job at separating out the individual sounds. The resolution of textures like the guitar and the strings was excellent from the A3 Pro. And when the acoustic guitar solo comes in the middle of the track, the sound from the A3 Pro is beautiful. It had a lovely combination of the attack and kind of the texture of the acoustic guitar, so when you could actually hear the picking of the strings or the plucking of the strings, but it also had a nice sense of the resonance and the body coming through as well. So all in all, nothing to complain about from the A3 Pro. As I said, the recording of the track isn't the best, but the A3 Pro sounded like it was probably getting about the most out of it that you could. Switching over then to the much more expensive Burson Soloist 3 XP, which retails for about $1,100 just over that. And I felt like the Soloist gave me a slightly crisper top end, but a top end that was maybe just a little bit more fatiguing in the long run, possibly slightly artificial sounding as well. And it's something I've spoken about before. I do think the Burson op amps, at least in the 3XP level of products, not talking about the GT level, but in the 3XP level, so the Soloist 3XP, the Conductor, etc., I often feel like the V6 Vivids have a very slightly artificial tonality to their treble. And so flipping back and forth between the Soloist and the A3 Pro, what I found was that the A3 Pro actually gave me more sense of extension in the treble. I felt like it was going all the way up more. Now, it wouldn't actually be providing more extension because the Soloist 3XP and the A3 Pro will both measure dead flat all the way through to 20 kHz, I'm sure. But the point of that is that with the A3 Pro, something about the way it's delivering the treble means you can hear it consistently all the way through the range of treble. Whereas I feel like there's maybe a little bit of emphasis placed on certain frequencies from the Soloist 3XP, not in terms of the frequency response changing, but the way the treble is delivered. It has a slightly crisper, slightly sort of sharper sounding treble at times, and I think it detracts from the overall kind of balance and neutrality of the full treble range. As a result, the Soloist has a slightly cleaner, crisper sound, which will suit some setups if you've got warmer headphones, maybe a warmer, richer sounding DAC, like an R2R DAC perhaps. That's where things could get a little bit different. But for me, I think the A3 Pro just had their edge in terms of balanced and neutral treble, but also a sense of refinement to it as well. I also feel like the A3 Pro was delivering just a little bit more kind of nuance, texture, and detail through the mid-range. It came across a little bit more articulate overall, you could say. And that guitar solo that I spoke about before with the acoustic guitar, I felt like the sense of body and weight in the guitar was a bit better from the A3 Pro. It came across to my ears as being a more natural sounding guitar, and even more importantly, I think the A3 Pro separated it better from the mix. As I said before, this is not a great recording, but the A3 Pro I think was doing a slightly better job of just separating each individual element of the sound and delivering it easily to me as a listener. And so for me at this point, the A3 Pro was clearly the amplifier that I would choose between these two. And that's saying something because I love the Soloist 3XP, I think it's a brilliant amplifier, but for less than half the price, the A3 Pro is as good and probably better. And in fact, when I changed over and tried the XLR inputs, recognizing that there was a bit of a delay when I had to switch the XLRs between the devices, when I went over to the XLR inputs, I think the A3 Pro might have gotten even better. Now that could be because the IGI outputs of the XLR are slightly better. I can't remember my testing and what I found about that. But whatever the reason was, giving it the XLR inputs gave it the ability to stretch its legs even further and go even further ahead of the Soloist 3XP. And so while both are fantastic amplifiers, the A3 Pro for size, for cost, I think for looks in some ways, and definitely for sound performance would be my choice of these two. And the benefit of that is you're going to have $600 left in your pocket to go and spend on other things like headphones. And so I nearly wrapped things up here, but I had a thought to see just how good the A3 Pro was. And having recently received the brand new updated version of the Burson Soloist GT, I was curious to see just how close the A3 Pro at $500 could get to the Burson Soloist GT at $3,000. This shouldn't even be a competition, but that's how good the A3 Pro is sounding. For this test, for the sake of simplicity and recognizing that it does create a slight advantage to the GT, I had the RCAs from the IGI going into the A3 Pro, and I had the XLRs from the IGI going to the Burson Soloist GT. One of the tracks I used for this was Buzzcut Season by Lord, and starting off on the A3 Pro, the sound again was just brilliant. The bass was tight and punchy, the vocal was clean and beautifully separated from the mix. But then as I moved over to the GT, it is clearly superior. There's a reason to spend more money and go to something like the GT, and yes, it is a lot more money. We're talking 6 times the price here, that's huge. But what you're getting for that money is significantly better separation of sounds, better sense of articulation, better sense of clarity, resolution, detail. Basically everything improves. The only thing that I wouldn't say improves is the tonality, and that's because I think the new Soloist GT has absolutely fixed any of those tonality issues that I mentioned before coming from the 3XP. And so now you've got two wonderfully natural and neutral tonality amps, and the difference really comes down to just the technicalities. The fact that the Soloist GT, for its massively extra cost, its massively extra size, its massively extra power, not that that dictates the quality, but for that extra money, you are getting a lot more for your money. And so there is a point at which the A3 Pro does fall short of more expensive competition, but it makes it no less impressive given that it's just $500. As I said in the opening, this is absolutely ridiculous. It is very, very rare in my experience to find products in this hobby that actually outperform other products that are twice as expensive. And so the A3 Pro is a particularly exciting amp in that respect, and as you can already tell, I'm going to be highly recommending it. But before I wrap up the review there's one more thing I wanted to talk about which I alluded to earlier, and that's the use of the A3 Pro with an external power supply. The A3 Pro uses a 12-volt DC input, so if you do get yourself a linear power supply with 12-volt output, and make sure you get sufficient ampage, I think it needs about 3 amps, I can't remember, make sure you check that before you go out and buy it. What you'll find if you add a quality linear power supply to the A3 Pro is what I would describe as maybe a 2 to 3% increase. So keep that in mind, don't go out and spend an absolute fortune on a linear power supply to pair with this one. The wall wart you're going to get from Geshelli Labs is already going to get you 98% of the way there. What you will get if you happen to have a linear power supply, or you do choose to invest in a linear power supply, is you get just a little bit more separation of sounds. The sound gets just a tiny bit more, what I'd call organic, a little bit more refined, natural, smooth sounding, not rolled off again, just a bit cleaner and smoother. And the end result is basically that everything just seems, as I said, a bit cleaner, a bit smoother, and a bit more separated. And that's normally what you'll find with things like power supply upgrades, is that if you're able to do anything that's removing any sense of noise or interference from the power supply, you're going to get a cleaner background, and that allows all the actual music to kind of step forward and be highlighted on its own. And so again, I can't stress enough, I'm not recommending that you go out and spend a bunch of money on buying an expensive power supply to go with the A3 Pro. I don't think it needs it, but you can get just an incremental increase in performance should you happen to add one. And so I'm going to wrap things up here by giving the A3 Pro one of the strongest recommendations of a product that I've ever given. I've reviewed some amazing, more expensive products like, say, the IEMS Amp 23R, or the Burson Soloist GT, or the Conductor GT from Burson. And all of those have been great, but I wouldn't give them as strong of a recommendation because they're also really expensive. Whereas what we've got going on here is an amplifier that with a bit of saving, with a bit of commitment to saving, is probably achievable for most people and is absolutely going to be end game for many of you. And so as I said before, I'll put a link down in the description below. You can jump through, you can check out the options for the A3 Pro, pick one up for yourself, and I almost guarantee, I can't quite guarantee because we're all different, but I'll almost go as far as guaranteeing that you're not going to be disappointed. This thing is an absolute beast, it's absolutely amazing, and I hope you love it as much as I do. As always, I hope you found this video useful, helpful, interesting, etc. And if you have, I'd love it if you'd hit the like button, and consider subscribing and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. But for now, let me leave it to the music. Happy listening, and particularly if you get yourself an A3 Pro, that's going to be wonderful listening. And I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.